I'm Jonah Goodhart, and I am the CEO of Moat. Thanks, Michael, and thanks, AppNexus, for hosting us here. Really happy to be here to talk about attention and to talk about time, something that is near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to jump in, and then I think we have a great day ahead. At a high level, this is really about making branding work. This is what I wrote down almost 6 years ago when I started Moat with a couple of partners. I want to figure out how to make branding work in digital. For a long time, digital has been focused on direct response. Turns out most of the advertising world is focused on branding, yet in digital we've gotten caught in this sort of DR trap, if you will. And from our perspective, there's an opportunity to have a better outcome for brands in digital. One of the challenges for brands, for Unilever, for companies like Nestle, is that there's no easy way to know what works. If you think about the challenge for branding, is that most of major marketer sales still happen offline. 90%, 92% of all retail sales in the US still happen offline. Cars, sodas, deodorant, you name it. And so while we spend more and more of our time in digital, we have a measurement gap. We're transacting somewhere else, and that's really hard to judge success. What happens if we come up with the wrong way to judge success? Well, we've done it for about 20 years, the 18 or so that I've been in this space, plus 2 more before that. Clicks have been a bad metric for a long time for brands for lots of reasons. One easy one is nobody does it. 3 in 10,000 click on an ad. As our friends at Nielsen say, virtually no relationship exists between clicks and brand metrics or offline sales. It's not even a proxy. Clicks have no correlation to people buying your product. Why does any of this matter? Who cares? Why are we talking about time and branding in digital? There's a tremendous amount of money at stake. The largest companies in our ecosystem, including AppNexus, including Facebook, including Google, believe that dollars will shift into digital if we can get this right. And they believe that branding is going to be the biggest part of that growth. So figuring this out is pretty important. Where does branding work? If you ask any CMO, any major marketer, they will tell you television. Television works. When I asked the CMO of Burger King, why do you buy so much TV? He said, it just works. I know it works. Every single major brand has told me that. My perspective is not digital versus television. My perspective is, what can we learn from television? TV always takes over the entire screen. It always tells you a story. There's always sight, sound, and motion. TV has challenges, though. One of them is that we're literally changing our behavior. We're spending a little bit less time as a society watching TV, and of course, digital is getting more of our time. When you look at younger demographics as an example, it's more extreme. 18 to 24, 20% down TV time spent over the last 2 years. 20%. It's a pretty big deal for the most successful brand medium in the last 50 years. And by the way, in the last 2 years, digital's been skyrocketing for that same audience. In fact, when you look at age groups over the last 4 years or 5 years in television, virtually every age group has declined in their time spent in TV. You have to look at 50 plus for more or less flat, and 65 plus actually increased time in TV in that time period. Everybody else is spending less time in TV and more time in digital. When you look at mediums, when you look at media, you look at television, cinema, radio, magazines, newspaper, every single one has lost attention from consumers, has lost time from consumers over the last 5 years. And of course, digital and the internet has picked up a lot of that slack and has gotten a lot of that time. Of course, as we know, a lot of that goes to our mobile devices. Right? We carry them around with us. They're at our bedside. Some millennials apparently sleep with their phones, which I don't. I guess I'm not a millennial anymore. One of the challenges, though, is what we do with our time. So we often read about how we all spend all of our time in mobile and everything is mobile. There's an app that you guys should all download called Moment. I have nothing to do with it, but it's a great app. Moment will tell you how much time you spend with your phone every day. It'll tell you how often you unlock your screen. They call them pickups. This is my Moment screen from Monday. I spent 5 hours and 14 minutes on my phone. I unlocked it 74 times, and you can look at the green up there to see that it started at around midnight or so that I picked up my phone for the first time that day. The average consumer spends about 3 hours a day on their mobile device. But turns out 3 of the top 4 things that they do doesn't involve ads. It's phone calls, it's texting, it's email. There's some ads sometimes in some of these places, but not a ton. And so the vast majority of our time is not actually in front of ads on our mobile devices. And so we have to ask a better question. The right denominator is time, because in the end of the day, we have to ask, how much time did I get in front of that consumer? Of the amount of potential, for me, 5 hours a day on my mobile device, it's not really 5 hours, it's a small subset of that where I actually had an ad in front of me or a marketer's message in front of me. That's the true denominator. The reason why we're talking about shifting from a served impression to, at the very least, a viewable one is because a served impression is like printed flyers. It has no connection at all to what we actually were exposed to or what we saw. Ultimately, we believe time is going to be the right denominator. Speaking of viewability, Michael mentioned it, we have foundational challenges in digital, true foundational challenges, structural challenges, and viewability is one of the key ones. A non-viewable ad quite simply has no value. It would be like driving down the highway, buying a billboard, and having it flipped the other way. But just because an ad is there doesn't mean that it was effective. Doesn't mean that it worked just because it was on the screen. Imagine if you were watching TV, and while you were watching TV, ads began showing up on the side of the screen. I think my clicker died here. Hold on a second. Yeah, can you flip to the next one? Uh-oh. All right. There we go. And I made a big deal about using my own laptop for this presentation instead of using theirs, by the way. So I said my laptop doesn't freeze. Imagine if TV looked like this. Imagine if there were ads running on the side of the screen while you were watching TV. That would be insane. How could you pay attention if there were ads and content on the screen at the same time? Well, actually, that's what digital is. We have ads and content on the screen at exactly the same time. If TV looked like that, we would ask a lot of questions. First of all, we'd ask about measurement. Our friends at Nielsen use something called a C3 and C7 convention for television. It basically means the amount of people you reached and how often you reached them, reach times frequency, which is a GRP. That doesn't make any sense. If you're one of 10 ads on the screen, you'd ask questions like, well, how do I know what somebody saw? How do I know what they paid attention to? Ultimately, attention's the key. Not just simply being on the screen, but ultimately getting somebody's attention. Attention just means notice. It just means consideration with a view towards action. Satya Nadella at Microsoft has a great quote, which is, the true scarce commodity is increasingly human attention. That is our scarce commodity. That is our scarce resource. It is what we all, as consumers, have to offer. And as Microsoft points out, our attention's falling. They did a study last year that said from 2000 to 2015, we've lost the average amount of attention that we pay from 12 seconds down to 8. In fact, according to Microsoft, that's 1 second less than a goldfish. So we have a hard time paying attention as a society. We have a conference in Montauk every year at a place that my partners and I own called the Surf Lodge. And we invited Alec Baldwin out, and he actually came and said a few words on attention, and I want to show it to you.
You know, obviously, getting people's attention in the media, it's pretty easy to do, I've found. There's really not a whole lot to it, although it doesn't always work out the way you want it to. And certainly, before I introduce the next speaker, to me, the key is to get people's attention and hold their attention with something that ultimately is worthwhile.
All right, so marketers want attention. Publishers deliver attention. That's what publishers sell in the end of the day, is the potential attention of their audience. And consumers will pay attention to the right experience. The idea of viewability was really simple. If you went to Times Square, your expectation would be that you can simply see an ad. A human being in their normal course of business walking through Times Square could physically see an ad. That was how the definitions for viewability were invented 5 years ago. The IAB, the ANA, and the 4As got together and said, let's make measurement make sense. Let's figure out how we get more money into digital by shifting to a viewable impression standard. And a viewable ad is just that. It's an ad that's on the screen. Non-viewable one is one that's not. In order to actually transact on viewability, you have to define it. You have to have a very specific set of definitions that tell you what happens for an ad to be counted as viewable. And so the Media Rating Council came up with a set of definitions, and through a long process of public comments and conversations, this is what they are. This is the industry standard for a viewable ad. It's at least half of the ad on the screen for 1 second. There's a time component. Or at least half of the video on the screen for 2 seconds. And by the way, the same exact definitions for mobile. So whether we're talking about mobile or desktop, basically the ad has to be on the screen for a second or two. One agency that some of the people in this room will know well decided that they wanted to have a different standard. And that's okay. They said, we're going to change the definition for ourselves and for our clients. What's interesting about that difference is the impact it had on the numbers. So for video specifically, this agency said, we're going to decide that time matters a lot more than just the 2 seconds. We want at least half the duration of the video. They also said you have to have audio. You need to be able to hear it as well as see it, because a lot of video comes from TV where it has audio as an important component. I'll show you what happened with those definitions. Looking at display, about half of ads, this is Q1 data, most recent quarter, about half of ads meet the MRC standard for being on the screen for 1 second, or the agency standard of 100%. So half do, half don't. Look at video though. About 60% of video meets the standard for 2 seconds, meaning is on the screen for 2 seconds. 80% of video is not there for at least 50% of the duration with audio enabled. 80%. 8 out of 10 videos don't meet that standard. That standard, by the way, more or less said you have to be able to see and hear the entire video. That's amazing in a $10 billion and very fast-growing market in video that 80% of the videos don't meet that threshold. By the way, mobile, more than half of mobile display ads don't meet that standard. And mobile video, interestingly, there's an even bigger difference. 67% of mobile video ads meet the MRC 2-second standard, and 90% don't meet this new agency standard, 90%. So definitions matter. How we define what an ad is matters, and time matters. And incidentally, the numbers aren't suddenly going up and to the right now that we have this data. We're getting a little bit better, but it's something we have to focus on. We're entirely focused on mobile, not exclusively, but it's where we spend a lot of our time and effort these days. We're the only company MRC accredited for mobile viewability today, and we spend a lot of our time trying to help the industry get to a better place. Viewability, incidentally, matters because, of course, if the ad is there, you're going to have awareness, recall, perception, intent go up. Of course, you'll have sales get impacted. Of course, pricing is going to change when you start changing the denominator. And publishers like Hulu are embracing viewability. They're selling based on it. They're transacting based on it. Parsec's entire model as a new company is based on the fact that the ad has to be there. That's the foundation. There's no concept of transacting on non-viewable ads for any new company that's invented. And that's really critical. Unilever, one of Moat's clients, uses this data, but also looks at time, looks at duration, looks at attention to try to understand effectiveness. They're taking these signals and they're literally making decisions about what creative works, what media works, what placements work. Measurement needs to be precise. It needs to be accurate. Trust matters quite a bit. In fact, there was a study by the ANA that 97% of marketers said media owners should be measured by a third party. I think it's great that AppNexus is building in their own stuff into their own platform, but ultimately I think we need independent third-party measurement for all media. It needs to be apples to apples, and it needs to work in every environment on every platform. That's why we were thrilled to announce a partnership with Twitter, where we're the only company live today measuring viewability on Twitter, the only company live today measuring viewability on Facebook, and the only company live today measuring viewability on YouTube. So the elephant in the room is that half the ads on the internet are not viewable. And if you've read the press, we have a humanity problem. We have fake traffic. We have people who are purposely, in some cases, not purposely in others, creating inventory and selling it into the market that's not real people. That's going to hold us back as an industry. If we want marketers to pull money out of digital, the quickest way to do it is to tell them that they're buying traffic that's not real. We have to solve this as an industry, and it's not a problem on one side or the other. It's collectively a problem for all of us. Without going too far into the weeds, what I would say is that it's complex. And I would say that the bad actors are specifically trying to build technology to beat the systems, to beat the platforms, to beat the exchanges, to beat the measurement companies, because that's how they make money. And even though it's illegal, they're continuing to do it. And so we all have to work together to take the money out of the ecosystem around non-human traffic. So human and viewable is the first step. I'm going to give you really quickly my favorite example of why we have to go farther. It's Captain Phillips running on the homepage of the New York Times, which I love because I love the movie Captain Phillips. If you haven't seen it, definitely watch it. I'm the captain now, he says. What I also love is that there was a Capital One ad that was viewable on that page. There were 2 Marc Jacobs ads from our friends at LVMH that were viewable on that page. And there was an NYU ad that was viewable on that page. Just being viewable doesn't mean that it worked. It doesn't mean that you noticed it. It doesn't mean that it was effective. It just means that it was there. We have to get to a better place. We have to ask a better question. Ultimately, attention is the key. This is a real website. This is where we end up if we stop at viewability. Consumers will vote on that experience, and they are voting, in my opinion, with ad blocking. 200 million plus ad blockers installed. I'm presenting next week at the IAB Ad Blocking and User Experience Conference, and one of the things that I'm presenting is new ad blocking data, which is showing that it continues to go up. Not through the roof necessarily, but it continues to go up. So this is a real problem that we have to address. We've taken TV ads at some basic level and dropped them into digital, and I don't think that works. I think we have to ask new questions about formats. We have to ask new questions about user experiences. Somebody said to me the other day, advertising is dead. Advertising's not dead. Advertising just has to change form. The way we advertise has to change. The way we tell a story has to change. We can't simply take a print ad and drop it into digital, which is what we did in the beginning. We need to adapt. Ads and content should feel seamless. In fact, we think ads are content. So how do you actually go about measuring attention without going too far into the details? I would say if I went to a store and I stood in front of that store, I could measure attention. How would I do it? Well, I'd tell you how many people walked by the store, how many people walked in, how long do they spend inside, what do they do, what do they interact with, do they pick anything up, for how long? And if I had outcomes, if I had sales, I could actually connect those dots. Now you get a sense of what was driving success. That's essentially what we do in digital. We track different signals, different environmental signals around, was the person on the page? Were they scrolling? Were they in another tab? Were they in another window? How long were they there? How fast were they moving? Did they interact with the ad itself? How long was it on the screen? And with those signals, we can begin to understand attention. And it works in display as well as video, as well as native, as well as any format as it should. So over 50 different signals that we're using, a lot of them with time components. In-view time being a dead simple one. How long was the ad exposed to the consumer? In the end of the day, somebody is choosing to have an ad exposed in some cases they're not. In the Parsec example, they're choosing to have an ad there. In some examples, you're not. So it's not just time that matters, but we have to ask the question of what the consumer was doing. Were they actively engaging with the ad or with the page? Were they navigating? Were they scrolling? How fast? Etc. The attention shift is really happening. By evidence, incidentally, of the 400 people or so here, I can tell you that this is the next industry megatrend. We've gone from viewability 5 years ago to non-human traffic being the most important topic, and those two are big components of attention. But ultimately, attention as currency is where this market is going to go, we believe. And the press is picking up on that with Ad Age calling attention the new oil. Recently, Digiday had an article about the Financial Times, of course, who's here and a good partner of ours, talking about the 13 brands that are doing time-based campaigns. Banner Connect said exposure time might be the new metric for measuring effectiveness. And there was a Digiday article on why publishers are teaming up to explore time-based selling. Lastly, of course, politely interruptive, thanks Parsec, politely interruptive, time-based advertising explained. This was at the New Fronts a couple of weeks ago. This was Crackle, this isn't me. But just to show you, this is a company owned by Sony about what they believe is happening in market, what they believe is the trend. It made me very proud to see that they put attention is the currency, because it's something that I very strongly believe. Attention is the currency. It is the focus of our industry, and it is where we're going. So with that, I thank you for your time and attention, and enjoy the day.